If you dance this tango, I'll marry you, the billionaire mockingly threw at the waitress. But what she did next, no one could have ever imagined. Before we begin, write in the comments what city you're watching from. And at the end, be sure to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the show, Henry Scott, the most talked about billionaire in New York. Young, handsome, with an ego the size of Wall Street. He held his champagne glass with the same confidence he held the room. Around him, business sharks and high society stars, all dreaming of even a single glance from him. The laughter was fake, the conversations calculated, and then the sound of shattering glass stopped everything. At Henry's feet stood Callie Brooks, a waitress, frozen, pale, her eyes fixed on his shoe, now soaked in champagne. The room fell into tense silence. Henry looked down, then slowly lifted his gaze. A perfect face, a cold stare, the posture of a man used to being in control. He couldn't stand being humiliated. And now, his $1,000 shoe was dripping wet. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he hissed, wiping his shoe with a linen napkin. Every word laced with poisonous irony. Callie swallowed but didn't look away. "I do. Looks like I accidentally splashed cold water on the wrong person, someone who's not used to it." A low, stunned "ooh" swept through the room. Someone covered their mouth. Others stared without blinking. Henry raised an eyebrow slightly. The corner of his mouth twitched. "You think this is funny?" "No, I think it's fair," she answered calmly but firmly. He leaned back, looking her up and down. Everything about him screamed arrogance. Custom suit, a watch more expensive than her car, and the look of someone who thinks the world revolves around his tie. "Bold. For someone who carries drinks," he muttered. "And you've got quite the opinion of yourself. For someone thrown off by a few bubbles," Callie shot back. Soft laughter echoed across the hall. Henry inhaled deeply. The orchestra, sensing the tension, fell silent. He raised his glass, still full, turned to the crowd and announced loudly, "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems our evening just got a lot more interesting." All eyes turned to him. Since Miss Brooks doesn't shy away from challenges, he paused. "I have one for her. Dance a tango with me, and I'll marry you. Right here." In front of everyone, laughter erupted in the room. Phones went up, recording every second. Callie stood still for a moment. Then she smiled, small but bold, confident. "Then get ready, Mr. Scott," she said calmly. "You're about to dance a tango you'll never forget." The room went quiet. Laughter vanished. Henry blinked, surprised. He expected shame. He expected begging. But not this. Not that answer. "Are you serious?" he asked. "I hope your new shoes slide well on the floor," she said, extending her hand with playful irony. He hesitated, just for a second, then decided the show would only boost his image, and accepted the challenge. He took her hand, firmly, with authority. The lights dimmed. The orchestra struck up a dramatic tango. The crowd closed in around them. Henry made the first move, stiff, confident, Callie, graceful, precise, proud. Her eyes locked on his. The contrast was stark. He'd used to power, she used to surviving, and now she was the one changing the rules. With every step, Callie seemed to reclaim a piece of herself. Lightness, confidence. The timid waitress was gone. Now, a woman who commanded the room danced before them. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. No one expected her to know how to dance. Henry began to lose his footing. He tried to take control, to lead with force. But Callie, gently, firmly, brought him back to rhythm. She was leading. Quiet laughter spread through the room. The great Henry Scott was being led by a waitress. He tried to take control, to regain his balance, but she spun him and finished the move with flawless precision. The crowd held its breath. Henry stumbled, nearly falling, only to be caught by her just in time. The ballroom erupted with applause and laughter. Red-faced and flustered, Henry struggled to maintain his composure. "Having fun?" he hissed through gritted teeth. She shot him a playful smile. "Very much." "Giving up, Mr. Scott?" He didn't reply, but something in his eyes shifted. Confidence gave way to something else. Was it admiration? Or perhaps curiosity? The music swelled. Callie moved with fire in her veins, her red hair glowing under the golden lights. Every step was a challenge. Every glance, a sharpened blade. Henry tried to take the lead. But it was already too late. The audience was hers. As the melody reached its climax, Callie spun sharply, ending the tango with a decisive step. And Henry, without even realizing, and dropped to one knee. The room exploded in thunderous applause. Breathless, Henry adjusted his jacket, masking his shock. "Not bad. For a waitress," he muttered with a strained smirk. Callie narrowed her eyes. "Not bad. For a man who can't dance," the crowd burst into laughter. The tension cracked, replaced by joy, cheers, and thunderous applause. And then, a voice echoed from the back of the room. Now it all makes sense. "She's the daughter of the legendary dancer, Bethany Brooks." Every head turned. Callie froze. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but her smile never faded. "It's true," she whispered. "Bethany Brooks is my mother." Silence fell, deep, respectful, unshakable. Henry looked at her in disbelief. "Then you inherited her talent?" "No, Mr. Scott," she said firmly. "I inherited her strength. The strength to never bow my head." The crowd rose to their feet. Applause swept through the ballroom like a wave. Callie took a deep breath, holding back tears. Henry stepped forward. "Callie, I don't," she said gently, stopping him. "I wasn't dancing for you. I danced for myself. And for my mother." She looked around the room with a quiet fire in her voice. "And for the record, don't worry. I have no intention of marrying a spoiled millionaire who can't even tango. I just wanted to knock you down a peg." The room roared with laughter and cheers. Henry stood frozen, stunned, watching as she walked away, head held high, her dress swaying to the music still echoing in his mind. At the door, she turned one last time. "Thank you for the stage. Mr. Scott, that was a fabulous debut." And with a smirk she added, "Oh, and take care of your shoes. Champagne stains don't wash out easily." The ballroom erupted again. Applause shook the walls. Henry, still standing in place, took a deep breath. For the first time he felt something money could never buy. Genuine admiration. That waitress had disarmed him, in a way no one ever had. The next morning, Callie woke to the relentless buzz of her phone. Still in her waitress uniform from the night before. She groggily grabbed the phone, then froze. Hundreds of notifications, messages, likes, shares. Her heart pounded. She opened the app and went. Still, the video of her tango with Henry Scott had gone viral. Over 2 million views. And rising, comments flooded in. She destroyed his ego. Who is this tango queen? Henry Scott just got humbled, live. She dropped the phone onto the bed, rubbing her face. This can't be happening. All she wanted was to finish her shift, get paid, and go home quietly. And now, the whole country knew her name. The phone rang again. It was Diana, her catering manager. Callie exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. "Hello, Callie. Where are you?" The voice on the phone was cold, sharp like ice. "At home." "Why?" "Because you're fired." "Don't come back." Callie bolted upright. "What?" "Diana, I was just dancing." "I didn't break any rules." But Diana's reply came like a slap. "You made headlines, Callie. Our clients don't want waitresses who steal the spotlight. They want shadows, and you ruined that." And just like that, the line went dead. She stared at her screen, fired for dancing too well. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Of course, putting arrogant billionaires in their place. Not exactly part of the job description, huh? The next few days were a roller coaster. The media couldn't get enough. Some called her a heroine, others a threat to the status quo. But one thing was clear. Callie had dared to challenge Wall Street. On the dance floor, they mocked her, said she was chasing fame off the back of Henry Scott. But the real blow came when they started digging. They found her past. That her mother, Bethany Brooks, was a renowned dancer in the 90s and had died young, leaving Callie to fend for herself. They found out she lived in a tiny apartment in the Bronx, working 3 jobs just to survive. Callie tried to block it all out. But how could she? Every time she stepped outside, the stares followed. Some wanted selfies. Others just wanted to laugh, and honestly, she no longer knew which felt worse. A week later, Callie sat on her old, beat-up couch, eating instant noodles straight from the pot. When the intercom buzzed, "Who is it?" she asked, cautious. "Delivery for Miss Brooks," she frowned. She hadn't ordered anything. Downstairs, a courier handed her a sleek, elegant envelope. The kind that didn't belong in the Bronx. Sign here, please. Back upstairs. She opened it. The paper was thick, expensive. The handwriting? Meticulous. Almost irritatingly perfect. Miss Brooks, I would like to offer you a professional opportunity. I need a tango instructor to prepare for a major gala in 6 weeks. Compensation will be generous. I look forward to your response. Sincerely, Henry Scott. Callie read the letter once, then twice, then a third time, and suddenly she laughed loudly. Is this a joke? She muttered. He wants me to teach him to dance? After everything? She crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash. But the next day, another letter came, then another, and another, each one the same. Henry Scott needed her. The pay generous. His tone apologetic. Callie tried to ignore it. But reality hit hard. No job, no money. Bills piling up like storm clouds. Then came the 5th letter. This time it included a blank check. She stared at it. A thin piece of paper. But it felt like a slap. Is this desperation or humiliation? She made a choice. She picked up the phone and dialed the number. Mr. Scott's office, said a polite voice. This is Callie Brooks. Tell your boss my answer is no. Are you sure? Mr. Scott was quite insistent. I'm sure. Thank you. And she hung up. 2 hours later, a knock at the door. She opened it and nearly slammed it shut again. There he was. Henry Scott, how did you find my address? She asked coldly. I have resources, he said, flashing that same smug smile she remembered all too well. Resources? Or just no respect for boundaries? He sighed. Can I come in? No. 5 minutes? 3, he smiled faintly, and stepped inside. The apartment was small, simple, but clean. Henry glanced around, not a single rude comment from him, and that alone surprised Callie. Well? She asked, impatience in her voice. I need your help, he said bluntly, and I need peace. Oh, no. Callie, I know I messed up back then. I was arrogant, rude, and you put me in my place, in front of everyone. He paused, then added, and you know what? I deserved it. Callie blinked, caught off guard. That almost sounded like an apology. It is an apology, he corrected her, seriously, sincerely. And I'm here because in 6 weeks I have a major event, a gala dinner with international investors. There's a dance performance. If I screw it up, lose a multi-million-dollar contract. Callie folded her arms. And I'm supposed to feel sorry for your millions? Because I'm offering you $50,000 for 6 weeks of training. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Callie swallowed hard. $50,000. That could buy her a full year of peace. But she couldn't accept it. Not from him. No, she said firmly. Henry's brow furrowed. Why not? Because I don't trust you. I think you just want to humiliate me again. He took a step closer. Callie, I'm not here to humiliate you. I really want to learn. She stared into his eyes, searching for a lie. But Henry Scott was like a locked chest. No, she repeated, opening the door. Leave. He hesitated, but then stepped out. At the door, he turned to her. I'm not giving up. And I'm not saying yes. He gave the faintest smile. We'll see. The next few days were a silent war. Flowers, messages, a full breakfast basket. Callie ignored everything, but then the rent bill came, and she had nothing left to pay with. She sat on the floor of her living room, staring at a mountain of unpaid bills. Her eyes closed. I'm going to regret this, she whispered. She picked up her phone. Dialed. Mr. Scott's office? This is Callie Brooks. I accept the offer, but on my terms. The very next day, she was already in his office, signing a contract she had written herself. Henry read every word carefully. Not a single complaint. He signed. That's it, he said, extending a hand. We're partners. Callie shook his hand with confidence, teacher and student. Nothing more, he smiled. Whatever you say. Teacher? The first lesson was set for the next day. Henry had rented a private dance studio. Callie arrived on time in simple sweatpants and a t-shirt. Henry was in a full suit. You're planning to dance in that? She asked, stunned. I always wear suits. Then you'll have to learn to dance in one. Good luck. She turned on the music. The lesson began. Henry tried to follow, but it was a mess. Stiff, awkward, like a soldier trying to waltz. He was used to commanding, not following. Relax your shoulders, Callie instructed. They are relaxed. They feel like an ironing board, Henry groaned. Are you always this gentle with your students? Only with the ones who pay well, she smirked. The lesson continued. Henry stepped on her foot, twice. The third time, Callie stopped the music. Are you angry at the music? Or at me? Neither, he snapped. Then why are you dancing like you're crushing ants? He exhaled sharply, trying to hold it together. I just can't get it, okay? I noticed, she replied, arms crossed. But unless you relax, it'll only get worse. Henry stared at her. Are you always this blunt? Always. It's part of the deal. He let out a short laugh. At least she was honest. Callie gave the faintest of smiles. Now, step 1, and try not to crush my foot. The lesson continued, the tension between them thick in the air. But beneath it, a thrill neither of them could deny. They argued at almost every turn. But something was shifting. Henry, always in control, felt the ground slip beneath him whenever Callie was near. And Callie, she began to suspect that behind that arrogant mask was something deeper, something hidden. Then it happened. During a turn, Henry lost his balance and slammed onto the floor. Callie froze, and then burst out laughing. Loud, unrestrained, tears rolling down her cheeks. Henry, red with embarrassment, couldn't help it. He laughed too. That was ridiculous, he admitted. That was genius. Callie howled, still laughing. For the first time, they laughed together. But then his phone rang. Henry glanced at the screen, and in an instant his expression changed. Stone cold. Sorry, he muttered, slipping out of the room. Callie stood there, alone. But her curiosity, it was burning. She crept closer to the door. Just close enough to catch fragments of the conversation. CL. I told you already. No, not like that. Lara, stop it. Her brow furrowed. CL. Lara, who the hell is Lara? That night, she couldn't sleep, Clara. Was she a girlfriend? Business partner? A jealous ex? A clingy relative? The not knowing was eating her alive. But one thing was clear. Asking him directly, out of the question, Henry Scott wasn't the type to open up. The next day, Callie walked into the studio with a mission. She had to know Henry was already there, staring at his phone, his face locked down like a vault. Good morning, teacher, she said with biting sarcasm. He didn't even look up. Morning. Where was the man from yesterday? Gone. Replaced by a cold, distant robot in an expensive suit. Everything okay? She asked, dropping her bag to the floor. Perfectly fine, he snapped. Right, you're just glowing with joy. Finally, he looked at her. And his gaze? Can we start the lesson? Callie crossed her arms. Sure, sir. Let's begin. She hit the music. Started demonstrating the steps, but Henry was off. His movement stiff, clumsy, as if he wasn't fighting the rhythm, but himself. Henry, relax, she tried gently. I am relaxed. You dance like a broken robot, he stopped abruptly. Eyes locked on hers, like she'd just dared him to a duel. You got a problem with how I dance? Yeah, you dance like you're mad at the floor. I'm not mad at anything, he snapped, louder than necessary. Callie stepped back, stunned. Wow, someone definitely woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Henry took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. But it was too late. The anger inside him was boiling over. You know what, Callie? Maybe I'm not the problem. Maybe you're just a terrible teacher. She blinked, shocked, then let out a short, cold laugh. Not from amusement, but disbelief. I see. So when you fall on your butt, it's my fault? When you stomp on my foot 3 times, also my fault. Fascinating. I didn't say that. You just did. She folded her arms. Henry clenched his fists. His eyes flared. You don't know anything about me. I know one thing. You're a robot in a designer suit who doesn't know how to handle emotions. Silence. Heavy. Charged. He stared at her. And in that stare, not just rage, but pain, deep pain, buried beneath layers of ice. You don't have the right to judge me, he said quietly. But there was danger in his tone, and I don't have the patience for people who explode for no reason. So if you want to keep doing these lessons, stop acting like a spoiled child. Henry stepped forward. His jaw tightened. Spoiled? He hissed. Yes, spoiled, she fired back, eyes locked on his. You have everything. Henry, money, power, influence, but you act like the world betrayed you, and you know what? That's just... He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He just stood there, stunned, eyes burning with a mix of fury and shock. Callie sighed, grabbed her bag. I'm leaving. When you decide to be human again, call me. The door slammed shut behind her. The studio stood empty. Only Henry remained. His breath was heavy, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. He knew it, he'd crossed a line. He knew Callie was right, but admitting it, that was harder than dancing any tango. 2 hours later, Callie sat in a cozy cafe near her apartment, clutching a steaming cup of hot chocolate. She was trying to push the memory of that awful morning out of her mind. She was just about to order a slice of pie when... Vibrate, a message, unknown number. Want to know who Clara is? Search. Henry Scott's wedding is canceled. Callie frowned. Who was this? Why would they send her this? Curiosity gnawed at her. She opened the browser and typed the phrase. In results appeared immediately. Billionaire. Henry Scott left at the altar. Bride runs off with pianist hours before the wedding. Henry. Scott, love scandal, betrayal, and disgrace. Her hand trembled slightly as she clicked on one of the articles. The story that followed was staggering. 3 years ago, Henry had been about to marry Clara Mitchell, a woman from a powerful Boston family. Everything was set. The church, the guests, the banquet. But just hours before the ceremony, Clara vanished. She left a letter. In it, she confessed she'd fallen in love with someone else. A simple pianist from a tiny bar in Greenwich Village. The scandal was massive. Henry became the laughingstock of high society. The press tore him apart. Callie put the phone down, letting out a short, incredulous laugh. Not because it was funny, but because the irony hit too hard. The man who just cracked jokes about marriage had once been left standing at the altar. It felt like something out of a bad movie, but the laughter died quickly. Suddenly everything clicked, his coldness, his bursts of anger, his inability to trust people. Henry Scott wasn't just a pompous billionaire. He was a man who had been brutally betrayed. Late that night, Callie received a message. From him, I'm sorry for today. Can we meet? She hesitated, then replied, Where? At the studio, please. Callie sighed, threw on her coat, and headed out. When she arrived, the studio was quiet, the door cracked open. Henry was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. He was still in his suit, but the tie was loose, his hair tousled. He no longer looked like the machine-like businessman. He looked human, real, and perhaps ready to open his heart. He looked exhausted, a man. He muttered more to himself than to her. Hi, he said when he saw her. Hi, she replied, not moving from the door. Henry stared at his hands. I was a real idiot today. You were? She didn't soften the blow. He let out a short, bitter laugh. You never make things easy, do you? Never have, and I'm not about to start now. Henry sighed, his eyes finally lifting to meet hers. I want to explain. About today. About everything. Callie crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe. You don't owe me anything, Henry. I'm not your therapist. I know, but I need to do this. She stood still for a moment, then slowly sank to the floor a few feet away from him. Then speak. Henry took a deep breath as if standing on the edge of a cliff. 3 years ago, I was supposed to get married. The woman I loved, or thought I loved, left me at the altar. She ran off with someone else, a pianist. He played in some dive bar. Callie didn't interrupt. She just listened. Everyone found out. The media, friends, business partners. I became a joke. And since then, I stopped trusting people, stopped believing anyone could be with me for who I am. Not just because of what I have. His voice softened, almost to a whisper. That's why I acted the way I did at the gala. I was trying to prove to myself that I was still in control, that no one would ever hurt me again. He looked at her, his eyes dark with something unreadable. And then, you appeared. You danced with me, and everything went off track. Callie felt something shift inside her. Was it sympathy? Or was it something deeper? And what about that call yesterday? She asked. Was it her? Henry nodded slowly. Sometimes she calls, apologizes, wants to talk. I never answered. But yesterday I did, and it was a mistake. Callie paused, her gaze drifting. Then with a soft sigh she spoke, her voice steady but full of meaning. You know, Henry, I get it, you've been hurt. We've all been through something. But that doesn't give you the right to take it out on the people who just want to help. He nodded, his expression regretful. I know. I'm sorry. Truly. She looked at him, trying to gauge if she believed him. Deep down, she did. Okay, she finally said. But if you lose control again, I'm walking away. And I won't come back. Henry gave a slight smile, a genuine one, not one of arrogance. Agreed. She stood, offering her hand. Let's start over. No shouting. No robot in a suit. He took her hand firmly. Deal. They stayed in the studio for hours, chatting aimlessly, laughing at silly jokes. For the first time, Callie didn't see Henry Scott as a billionaire. She saw a real person. Broken, vulnerable, alive. By the time she left the studio, the night had fallen. The New York sky was wrapped in darkness, the streets flickering with the glow of streetlights. Callie pulled out her phone to call a taxi and noticed a new message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped. She opened it, the message making her blood run cold. He will destroy you too. Callie froze. Reading the message again, her mind racing. Then her gaze turned back to the glowing studio where Henry was still inside. Who had sent this? And why? She tucked her phone away, but the unease wouldn't leave. Something felt wrong. That night's sleep was elusive. Her mind kept returning to those words. He will destroy you too. Who had written it? And why did someone care? The next morning, Callie woke with a decision. She wasn't going to dwell on it. It was probably some angry ex-employee or that bitter fan of Clara's. People like Henry always had enemies lurking in the shadows. But when she stepped into the studio, she knew something had changed. She had changed. She was more guarded, more distant. An invisible wall seemed to have risen between her and Henry. He noticed it immediately. Good morning, teacher, he greeted with a smile. Trying to break the ice. Good morning, she replied, avoiding his gaze. She dropped her bag in the corner and immediately started the music. Henry furrowed his brow, sensing the tension. Is everything okay? Perfect. Shall we begin? He shrugged and took his place, but the atmosphere was different. Callie moved through the lesson mechanically, her voice flat, almost lifeless. She corrected his mistakes with curt, impersonal phrases. There were no playful teases, no laughter like before. Something had shifted. And it wasn't just in the dance. Henry tried a few times to spark a casual conversation, but she deflected him each time until, finally, he stopped mid-move. Okay, what's going on? Nothing. Keep dancing. Callie, you've barely looked at me today. What happened? She sighed, folding her arms across her chest. Nothing happened, Henry. I'm just doing my job. He took a step closer, his gaze full of confusion and unspoken questions. So, between us now, it's just professionalism? Just like that? It always was, she answered coldly. Henry stepped forward, his eyes searching hers. But last night, we talked, we laughed. You said we'd start fresh. Now you're acting like I'm a stranger. What changed? Callie froze, caught off guard. She couldn't tell him about the message. She couldn't say it without sounding paranoid or dramatic. Nothing changed, she said, her voice flat. I just remembered where I belong. Henry fell silent, processing her words. Then with a soft smirk, he spoke, this time with a knowing edge. I see. You're scared. Callie blinked, taken aback. Scared of what? Scared to trust me, she laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. Henry, I barely know you. Why should I trust you? Because yesterday I trusted you. I told you something no one else knows, and I appreciate that. But that doesn't change the fact that you hired me to teach you the tango, not to be your friend. He took another step forward, nearly closing the gap between them. So, you don't want to be my friend? Callie met his gaze with unwavering stubbornness. No, I want to do my job, get paid, and move on with my life. You're lying. Excuse me? You're lying. Yesterday you were different. You listened. You were there. And now you act like none of it mattered. All because you're afraid of getting close. Callie's face flushed. He'd hit the mark, and that made her even angrier. You're so full of yourself, you know that? And you're so stubborn, he grinned. They stood there, locked in an unspoken battle. The tension between them was palpable, thick, almost suffocating. Finally, Henry sighed and stepped back. Fine, if that's how you want it, let's keep it professional. But know this, I don't believe a word you say. Callie didn't answer. She simply returned to the lesson. But the air had shifted. Now every movement carried an edge. Something electric, tense. The following days were a strange mix of business and subtle, almost invisible teasing. Henry constantly tested her boundaries. Jokes, lingering touches at her waist, staring into her eyes in a way that made her heart race. She tried to keep her distance, but each passing day it grew harder. And then, one evening, Thursday, Henry surprised her. "Dinner at my place, tomorrow. What do you think?" Callie, just packing up her bag, turned sharply at the suggestion. "Dinner?" "Yes, food, drinks, conversation. You know, like normal people do." "Why?" "Because I want to. And because you deserve a thank you for my progress." Callie froze. Every alarm bell inside her screamed, but she wanted to go. She wanted to know more about him. See who he was beyond the dance floor. "All right," she finally said reluctantly. "But no drama, I promise. No KVR." The next evening, Callie showed up at his apartment in jeans and a simple blouse. She rang the doorbell, her chest tight with nerves. The door opened and she almost laughed. Henry was wearing an apron. A floral, goofy apron that was completely out of place on him. "Don't you dare laugh," he said seriously. "This apron was my grandmother's. Your grandmother had terrible taste," Callie teased as she walked inside. His apartment was massive, yet somehow cozy. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, giving a breathtaking view of New York's glowing skyline. The kitchen, however, was utter chaos. "You cook?" she asked, incredulous. "I try," he corrected her. "But it's not going great." She walked over to the stove and saw a pot filled with something that was supposed to be tomato sauce, but looked more like lava. "Henry, what is this?" "Carbonara sauce." Callie took a spoon, tried it, and grimaced. "This isn't carbonara. This is a crime against Italy." He crossed his arms, feigning hurt. "So now you're also a chef?" "No, but I know for a fact that you don't put ketchup in carbonara." "I didn't put ketchup." "Then why does it taste like burnt ketchup?" Henry stared at the pot, puzzled. "Honestly, I have no idea." Callie burst out laughing, loud, unrestrained. Henry couldn't help but join in. The tension of the past few days melted away in this absurd, unexpected moment. "Step aside," she said, pulling the apron off him. "Before you burn the whole apartment down?" "I had it under control." "You were creating biological warfare." She took over the kitchen and Henry leaned against the counter, watching her with a smile. 20 minutes later, with simple pasta, garlic, and fresh tomatoes, dinner was ready. "There, real carbonara," she said, serving up the plates. They sat down at the table and Henry uncorked a bottle of wine. But as soon as he pulled the cork, it shot out with such force that wine splashed all over Callie's shirt. "Henry, I'm sorry. Honestly, it wasn't on purpose." Callie looked down at her soaked shirt and burst into laughter. "You are a walking disaster, you know that?" "I think I'm starting to get it," Henry muttered, handing her a towel. They sat down to eat, chatting, laughing. Callie shared funny stories from her past jobs, while Henry surprised her with simple, almost innocent childhood memories. The evening was light, carefree, until Henry suddenly declared dessert. "Henry, please." "Oh, don't," Callie pleaded. "Trust me." "Well, no, don't." But still, before she could protest further, he was already mixing ingredients. 5 minutes later, beep, 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 the fire alarm went off. Black smoke poured out of the oven. "What did you put in there?" Callie screamed, throwing open the windows. "Brownies. I was just following the recipe." "The recipe didn't say to set them on fire." They managed to turn off the alarm, but the apartment was filled with the stench of burnt food. Callie looked at Henry, covered in flour, a streak of chocolate on his cheek, and laughed again. Tears rolled down her face. "You are impossible." "Thanks," Henry replied, laughing along with her. They could barely breathe from laughing so hard. But then, silence. They stood there, facing each other amidst the chaos, surrounded by smoke. Henry took a step forward. Callie didn't move. His fingers gently brushed her cheek, wiping away a drop of flour. "Callie," he whispered. Her heart raced. "Yeah?" She stammered, her breath catching. I wanted to." but she never finished. He kissed her, gently, almost tentatively, but Callie responded, and in that instant, something between them snapped. The kiss deepened, grew stronger, as if all the tension that had built up between them was released in one powerful moment. When they finally pulled away, both were breathless. That was unexpected, Callie whispered. Yeah. Henry nodded, smiling softly. They stood there in silence until Callie suddenly remembered. I need to grab my phone. It's in the living room. Of course, she walked away, still feeling the warmth of his kiss lingering on her lips. But when she entered the living room, her eyes landed on the coffee table. Half hidden under a magazine was a document. Bold letters across the top read, "Confidential," and below that, her name, Callie Brooks. Her hands trembled. She flipped open the first page and froze. It was a file, a complete dossier. Her previous jobs, addresses, old photos of her with her mother. Henry had investigated her. Without her knowledge, without her consent. Callie? Henry's voice echoed from the kitchen. Did you find your phone? She didn't answer. She stood frozen, clutching the papers, her chest boiling with rage. Henry appeared in the doorway, his smile fading as he saw what she was holding. Callie, what's this? I'm curious too, Henry. What is this? Her voice was dangerously quiet. I can explain everything. Explain what? That you've been spying on me like I'm some kind of criminal? Digging through my life without permission? It's not what you think. He stepped closer. Then what is it? She shouted, slamming the documents onto the table. Did you think you had the right to know everything about me before you hired me? Silence. Henry didn't answer. Or did you think I was hiding something? Her voice cracked with disbelief. Henry, I just wanted to make sure. You wanted to make sure that I wasn't a fraud? That I wasn't going to steal your things? Tears began to fall from her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. I trusted you, she said, her voice trembling. I really believed you'd changed. But you're still the same. You think you can buy anything, even people. That's not true, Henry exclaimed, panic rising in his voice. Callie, please. No, I'm done. The contract, the lessons, everything. It's over. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. Callie. Wait. She stopped at the doorway but didn't turn around. You still think everything has a price? Henry, but some things aren't for sale. Trust is one of them. And with that, she left, slamming the door behind her. Henry stood alone in the middle of the room. Silence weighed on him like a ton of bricks. His breathing was heavy, his heart pounding. He knew he'd gone too far. He knew Callie was right. But admitting that was harder than any dance he'd ever done. 2 hours later, Callie sat in a quiet cafe near her home, holding a cup of hot chocolate, trying to shake off the awful morning. She was about to order a slice of pie when her phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. Want to know who Clara is? Type Henry Scott wedding canceled. Callie frowned. Who was this? Why send her this? But curiosity won. She opened her browser and typed in the phrase. The results appeared instantly. Billionaire. Henry Scott left at the altar. Bride runs off with pianist just hours before. Wedding, Henry Scott, love scandal, betrayal, and disgrace. Callie tapped on one of the articles and began to read. The story was shocking. 3 years ago, Henry was supposed to marry Clara Mitchell, a girl from an influential Boston family. Everything was ready, the church, the guests, the banquet. But just hours before the ceremony, Clara vanished. She left a letter. In it, a confession. She had fallen in love with someone else. A simple pianist from a little bar in Greenwich Village. The scandal was massive. Henry became a laughingstock in high society. The press was ruthless. Callie put the phone down and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the irony was just too much. The man who had joked about marriage had once been left at the altar. It was like something out of a bad movie, but the laughter faded quickly. Suddenly, so much made sense. His coldness, his bursts of anger, his distrust of people. Henry Scott wasn't just an arrogant billionaire. He was a man who had once been deeply betrayed. Later that evening, Callie received a message. From him, I'm sorry about today. Can we talk? She paused. Then replied, where? At the studio, please. Callie sighed, pulled on her coat, and went. When she entered, Henry was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. He was still in his suit, but the tie was loosened, his hair slightly messy. He no longer looked like a machine. He looked human, real, and maybe, just maybe, ready to open his heart. He looked exhausted, human. He muttered. "Hi," he said when he saw her. "Hi," Callie replied, staying near the door. Henry stared at his hands. "I was real idiot today." "You were," she confirmed without softening her tone. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "You never make things easy, do you?" "I never have, and I'm not about to start now." Henry sighed and finally met her eyes. "I want to explain. About today. About everything." Callie crossed her arms. "You don't owe me anything, Henry. I'm not your therapist." "I know, but I need to say it." She hesitated, then slowly sat on the floor, a few steps away from him. "Then talk." Henry took a deep breath, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. 3 years ago, I was supposed to get married. The woman I loved, or thought I loved, left me at the altar. She ran away with someone else, a pianist. He played in some rundown bar. Callie said nothing. She just listened. Everyone found out. The media, my friends, business partners. I became a joke. And ever since then, I stopped trusting people, stopped believing anyone could want me for me, not for what I have. He fell silent. His voice dropped to a whisper. That's why I acted the way I did at the gala. I was trying to prove to myself I was still in control, that no one could hurt me again. I trusted you, she had told him. But the truth was, he didn't even trust himself, and she was already gone. The next morning, a knock at the office door snapped him out of his thoughts. It was Thomas, the private investigator Henry had hired weeks ago. "Mr. Scott," Thomas greeted, holding a thick folder. "What do you want?" Henry asked, barely breathing. "I have something you need to see." Thomas placed the folder on the desk. On the cover, in bold letters, Callie Brooks, complete dossier. Henry looked at it, his stomach twisted. He didn't know if he wanted to open it, but he knew he had to, with shaky hands. He opened the folder. The first few pages were what he already knew. Callie's work history, old addresses, financial records. Nothing unusual. Then he turned another page and froze. There was an old, faded photograph. A girl, maybe 10 years old, smiling beside an elegant woman. Bethany Brooks, Callie's mother. Next to them, a man in a suit, his face partially cut off. But something about it struck Henry like lightning. He kept reading, and what he found knocked the breath from his lungs. Callie's father hadn't just disappeared. He had a name Henry knew very well. Richard Palmer. Henry dropped the folder like it was on fire. Richard Palmer, one of the biggest investors in Henry's company, a powerful, respected man with connections all over Wall Street. And he was the one who had abandoned Callie and her mother when she was just 12. This can't be real, Henry whispered, rereading the document. But it was. Everything matched. Dates, places, even the old photographs Thomas had dug up from some forgotten archive. Richard Palmer was Callie's father, and she probably had no idea how close he really was now. Henry grabbed his phone and dialed her immediately, straight to voicemail. He called again. Nothing, she had blocked him. "Damn it," he muttered, tossing the phone onto the desk. Thomas cleared his throat. "Mr. Scott, there's more in the file. Maybe you should—" "No," Henry cut him off, closing the folder. "I've seen enough. Thank you, Thomas. You can go." Thomas hesitated, then left. Henry was alone in his office again, staring at the folder like it was a bomb waiting to explode. He had to tell Callie. She needed to know her father was here, and that he was a partner in Henry's company. But how? She wouldn't answer his calls, wouldn't read his messages. She probably hated him now. Henry rubbed his face, exhausted. Everything was falling apart. Hours later, his secretary, Veronica, entered the office without knocking. Efficient, always reserved. But something about her always rubbed Henry the wrong way. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, like she expected something he'd never give. "Mr. Scott, I need your signature on these documents," she said. Placing a stack of papers on his desk, Henry barely looked up. "Leave them. I'll sign later." But Veronica didn't leave. She stood there, looking at the closed folder on his desk. Henry noticed. "Do you need something?" he asked sharply. "No, I just thought maybe you needed someone to talk to." You look tired. I'm fine, he replied coldly. Veronica nodded and finally left, but Henry didn't realize. She had seen the name on the folder. That very night she came back to the office and read every word. 2 days later, hell began. Callie woke up to the relentless buzz of notifications on her phone. But this time, it was much worse. Much worse. Headlines screamed at her from every corner of the internet. Waitress who humiliated billionaire is Richard Palmer's daughter. Investor accused in financial scandal. Callie Brooks, from abandoned girl to opportunist. The dark past of the dancer who captivated Henry Scott. It felt like the earth had slipped away beneath her. Her hands trembling, she clicked on one of the articles, her eyes racing to read the words. Each one felt like a knife to the heart. They told everything. About how her father abandoned their family, his shady deals and scams, how she grew up in poverty while he built his empire. And at the end, there was an old photo, a picture of her and her mother laughing at her birthday. A photo she had carefully hidden in a family album, far away from prying eyes. How did the journalists get it? With a scream, Callie hurled the phone across the room. It hit the wall and crashed to the floor. She collapsed, her body shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her life was falling apart again. And this time, there was no way out. In the days that followed, Callie became the subject of mockery. Nasty comments flooded her social media. Articles ridiculing her past. Even random strangers took shots at her on the street. She couldn't take it anymore. Packing a small suitcase, she grabbed a few essentials and vanished from New York without a word to anyone. She drove to a quiet coastal town called Cape Haven, a place where no one knew her, where for the first time in what felt like forever, she could just breathe. There, she found work at a small cafe. Homemade pies, fresh coffee. The owner, an older man named George, didn't ask questions. He just hired her and left her to herself. And for the first time in weeks, Callie was able to sleep without nightmares. Meanwhile, back in New York, Henry was livid. He had seen the headlines. He read every single disgusting article, and he knew exactly where it all started. That folder. The one he had left carelessly on his desk. He immediately called Thomas and demanded an urgent investigation. Who had been in the office? Who made copies? The answer came quickly, and it was like a punch to the gut. Veronica, a cold, furious rage surged within him. Veronica had stolen the dossier, copied it, and leaked it to the press. When he confronted her face to face, she didn't even try to deny it. I did what I had to do, she said, her voice as icy as her gaze. That waitress used you, Henry. She just wanted your money and your fame. I protected you. Henry stared at her, speechless in shock. You ruined her life. You exposed secrets she didn't even know about herself. So what? Veronica hissed, her eyes flashing with dangerous intensity. She's not worthy of you. I am worthy. I've always been here, always supported you, but you never saw me. Henry took a deep breath, trying to maintain control. You're fired. Pack your things and leave my office, now. Veronica turned pale, her eyes wide. Henry, you can't. I can. And if you ever try to contact me again, I'll make sure you'll never work anywhere again. Do you understand? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. With a furious hiss, she grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Henry sank into his chair, his head spinning. Everything was falling apart, and the one person he wanted by his side was miles away, and most likely hated him more than ever. But he wasn't ready to give up. He hired a new private investigator, not to spy on her, but to find her. 3 days later, the answer came. Cape Haven, Sunset Brew Cafe. Without hesitation, Henry got in his car and drove for 4 straight hours, only stopping for gas. By the time he arrived, it was a late autumn afternoon. The sun hung low over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The cafe was easy to find, small, cozy, wooden tables, floral curtains, and there she was. Callie was wiping down the table. Her red hair was loosely tied back in a ponytail. A simple look, tired eyes. But there was something new in them. Calmness, freedom. It was as if she had finally found a place where she could just be herself. But little did she know, sometimes, no matter how dark your past is, it comes back. Not to destroy, but to redeem. The door opened slowly. Henry stepped inside, and the moment the bell above the door rang, Callie looked up and froze. "You." She breathed the word out, her voice barely holding back the anger. "Hi," Henry said quietly, unsure of what to add. Callie dropped the rag onto the table and walked toward him, her eyes burning. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you. We need to talk." Henry's voice trembled. "We have nothing to talk about," she replied coldly. "You've already said everything, or rather your file said everything." "Callie, I didn't spread it. It was my secretary. I fired her the moment I found out." She crossed her arms, her gaze icy. "And so? Does that change anything?" "You investigated me, Henry. You broke into my private life, found things I didn't even know about, and put it all in a file like I'm some problem to be solved. I know. I was wrong, so wrong, but I'm here to tell you something important. I don't want to hear it. Your father. He's in New York. He's one of my company's investors." The silence that followed was deafening. Callie blinked, trying to process what he had just said. "What, Richard Palmer? He's one of your major investors, and you're telling me he's your father?" "I was going to tell you, but everything exploded before I could." Callie collapsed into a chair, her legs shaking. "My father's in New York and you work with him?" "Yes." She stared at Henry, tears welling in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I found out the same day you left my apartment." "Then you blocked me." "I tried to warn you, Callie. I really did." She buried her face in her hands, trying to absorb it all. Henry took a hesitant step forward. "Callie, I know you don't trust me anymore, and that's fair. But I came because I care. I want to make things right. Let me." Callie looked at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. She wanted to scream, to throw him out, but there was something real in his eyes. Regret and maybe something more. Suddenly, Henry's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and went pale. "What's wrong?" Callie asked. Henry answered the call, and what he heard shattered his world. "Mr. Scott, this is urgent. Richard Palmer is gathering the investors. He's trying to push you out of the company, and it looks like he has the votes." Henry hung up, stunned. He turned to Callie, who was watching him intently, waiting for a response. "Your father. He's trying to destroy me." Callie saw the fear in his eyes. Part of her wanted to say, "He deserves it." But another part, the part she was trying to bury, felt a wave of worry. "When is the meeting?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. "Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., Henry answered, nervously running his hand through his hair. "If I'm not there, they'll vote without me, and I'll lose everything." Callie crossed her arms, thinking that she had every reason to leave him to solve his own problems. But something inside her wouldn't let her walk away. "You have 4 hours of travel ahead," she said, glancing at the clock. "If you leave now, you'll be in New York by midnight." Henry looked at her, stunned. "Are you really going to help me?" "No, I'm just being practical. Go before I change my mind." He hesitated, then took a step forward. "Will you come with me?" "What?" "Come with me to New York. I need you, Callie. Not just for the company, but for me." Callie laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Henry, are you serious? Why would I go back into that nightmare?" "Because the person trying to destroy me is your father, and you deserve to face him just as much as I do." A heavy silence fell between them. Callie knew he was right. Richard Palmer had abandoned her at the worst possible moment. Now he returned, like a player holding everyone's fate in his hands. She sighed and surrendered. "I'll probably regret this," she muttered under her breath. For the first time in ages, Henry smiled. "Then let's go." Callie removed her apron and yelled toward the kitchen. "George, I need some time off." "How long?" came the voice from the other room. "I don't know. Maybe forever if this all goes south." George appeared in the doorway, puzzled but shrugged. "All right, kid. Good luck with that." Callie grabbed her bag and followed Henry out to the car. The drive back to New York was tense, as though they were walking a razor's edge. But slowly, the conversation found its way, talking about the company, Richard Palmer, and what they planned to do when they got to the city. "So, what's the plan?" Callie asked, taking a bite of the chocolate bar they had grabbed at the gas station. "I need to convince the other investors not to vote against me. Show them Richard's playing a personal game, not a business one." "And how do you plan to prove that?" Henry asked, a hint of skepticism in his voice. He hesitated before replying. I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Callie rolled her eyes. Great, so we have no plan at all. Got a better idea? Henry countered, not giving up. Not yet, but I'll come up with something. You're definitely not a strategy genius. Henry laughed, and for the first time in days he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, everything wasn't lost yet. They arrived in New York just past midnight. Henry dropped Callie off at a quiet hotel and headed home. The next morning, exactly at 7, he knocked on her door. Ready? He asked when she answered in her pajamas. Henry, it's 7 a.m. Our meeting is at 9. I know, but first we need to stop by the office. I've got some documents that might help. Callie sighed and slammed the door shut in his face. Give me 20 minutes. Half an hour later, she emerged in jeans and a simple blouse. Henry eyed her with doubt. You're really going like that? What's wrong? She frowned, clearly irritated. This is a meeting with investors. Usually people dress more professionally. Henry, I'm a waitress out of a job. This is my professional outfit. Henry opened his mouth to argue, but then laughed instead. Fine, let's go. At the office, Henry dug through files while Callie sat munching on a donut from the reception area. Do you really think there's anything useful in here? She asked, her mouth full. There should be. Richard's not perfect. He's definitely left something behind. Callie stood up and began flipping through papers. Suddenly, her eyes landed on an envelope with Richard Palmer, written by hand on the front. Henry, what's this? He took the envelope, opened it, and inside was an old note. 3 years ago, Richard had offered money for Henry to sign a dubious contract. Henry had refused, but the letter proved Richard had been trying to manipulate him for a long time. Will this work? Callie asked hopefully. It'll work, Henry smiled. Perfectly. The meeting was held in a luxurious conference room at the top of a skyscraper. As Henry and Callie walked in, all eyes were on them. Richard Palmer sat at the head of the table, flawless and confident, though his confidence was stretched thin, like a mask ready to crack. Henry, he greeted, his voice dripping with insincere warmth. Didn't think you'd show up. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Henry replied calmly, taking his seat. Callie stood beside him, feeling uncomfortable under the weight of all the stares. Richard noticed her and frowned. And who is this? Callie took a deep breath and stepped forward. I'm Callie Brooks, your daughter. A grave silence followed. Richard went pale, his eyes wide. The other investors exchanged confused glances. My daughter? He whispered, his voice trembling. Yes, your daughter. The one you abandoned 15 years ago. Remember me? Or did you forget you had a family before you became such an important man? Richard tried to gather himself. Callie, now is not the time or place. Not the time, she interrupted, crossing her arms. When is the right time, then? When you're ruining other people's lives. Right now? One of the investors, an elderly man named William, cleared his throat. Mr. Palmer, what's going on here? Richard cleared his throat, trying to compose himself. This is personal. It has nothing to do with business. I have a motive, Henry interrupted, standing up. Because the reason he wants to kick me out of the company isn't business at all. It's personal revenge. Absurd, Richard exclaimed. Henry placed an old letter on the table. Then explain this. A letter from you 3 years ago, trying to bribe me into signing an illegal deal. I refused, and since then you've been trying to sabotage me. The investors started reading the letter. Richard's face flushed. That proves nothing, he stammered. It proves you can't be trusted, William replied coldly, throwing the letter back on the table. If you use the company to settle personal scores, maybe you don't belong here. Richard looked around and realized he was losing control. His gaze fell on Callie. That was you, he accused, pointing a finger. You came here to humiliate me, didn't you? Callie stepped forward and looked him straight in the eyes. No, I came because you're my father, and despite everything, I thought you deserved to know I exist. But now I see that you haven't changed a bit. You're the same selfish man who abandoned a sick mother and a little girl. Those words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth but couldn't say a thing. Callie turned to the other investors. Want to know why he's doing this? Because he found out Henry hired me. He thinks he can protect me by destroying someone else's life. But I don't need his protection. Never did. William looked at Richard with disappointment. I think we need to reconsider this vote. Richard tried to object, but it was too late. One by one, the investors voiced their support for Henry. The vote became a formality. After the meeting, Callie left the building and took a deep breath. Henry followed her. "You were amazing in there," he said. "I just told the truth," she replied, avoiding his gaze. Henry stepped closer. "Callie, thank you for everything. You didn't have to do that." "I know, but you shouldn't have looked for me either." They stood on the sidewalk, looking into each other's eyes. Something had changed between them. Anger gave way to something else, warm, real. But before either could speak, Henry's phone rang. It was William. "Henry, I'm warning you. Richard hasn't given up. He's up to something. Stay alert." Henry hung up, worried. "Callie, it seems your father isn't finished yet." "He never is," she whispered. "But I won't let him ruin everything again." The following days were full of tension and surprises. Henry and Callie worked together to strengthen his position in the company. They met with investors, reviewed contracts, and even came up with a ridiculous disguise plan to sneak into a secret meeting where Richard was plotting. Callie wore a blonde wig and huge glasses, and Henry dressed as a pizza delivery guy. "I look ridiculous," Henry complained in the elevator. "You are ridiculous," Callie laughed. Despite the chaos, something grew between them. Shared laughter, lingering looks, accidental touches. But Richard Palmer watched on disapprovingly. A week later, Henry invited Callie to an important business gala. He needed to show strength before partners. "You want me to go?" Callie asked, surprised. "Yes, you're needed there. And besides, you deserve this night after everything." Callie hesitated but agreed. On the day of the event, she prepared carefully, wearing a simple but elegant dress from a discount store. When Henry saw her, he was speechless. "You look stunning," he finally said. "Thank you. You don't look bad yourself." The party was full of important people. Music, champagne, refined conversations. Callie felt out of place, but Henry stayed close, proudly introducing her as the woman who saved his company. Everything had been going smoothly, until Richard Palmer stepped onto the stage. He called for silence. The room went still. "Good evening," he began in a calm, steady voice. "I have an important announcement." Henry felt his knees buckle. Callie gripped his hand tightly, her tension palpable. "Recently, I learned something disturbing about Mr. Henry Scott," Richard continued, his voice cutting through the silence. "A few months ago, he made a bet with a friend. The wager was to win over a woman, just to prove his power. And that woman is here tonight." All eyes turned to Callie. She went pale. "That's not true," Henry whispered desperately. But Richard wasn't finished. "I have proof, messages, recordings, everything documented. Henry Scott used my daughter as a pawn in a cruel game." The room erupted in hushed whispers. Callie looked at Henry, tears filling her eyes. "Callie, you have to believe me," he pleaded. "I never did that. You were never part of any bet." But she couldn't hear him. The pain was too overwhelming. Feeling betrayed and used, she pulled her hand from his and bolted from the room. Henry tried to follow, but he was surrounded by reporters and angry guests. His reputation was in ruins, and Callie, the one person who truly mattered, had vanished. The following days became a nightmare for Henry. The headlines never stopped. "Billionaire makes cruel bet with Waitress." "Henry Scott, the man who turned love into a game." "Scandal rocks Wall Street." Investors left his company one by one. Each new article was worse than the last. And the worst part? No matter how much he denied it, no one believed him. The so-called evidence Richard Palmer had mentioned was never released. But the damage was already done. Contracts began to disappear. Major clients withdrew their deals. Former partners stopped answering his calls. Even old friends turned their backs on him. He was alone. The only person whose opinion truly mattered refused to even look in his direction. Henry called Callie dozens of times. All calls went to voicemail. His messages went unanswered. He even tried to visit her home, but the landlady told him she had moved out, leaving no forwarding address. Callie was gone, taking Henry's last hope with her. Meanwhile, Callie was trying to rebuild her life. She returned to the Bronx, rented a tiny room above a laundromat, and tried to forget everything that had happened. But the nights were unbearable. She'd wake up, haunted by memories of Henry, his gaze, their laughter, and then that night Richard's words, the humiliation. She no longer knew who she could trust, but one thing was certain. She wouldn't let this break her. Not again. Callie began attending a small studio in the neighborhood. It was a simple place with worn wooden floors and cracked mirrors, but it had soul. When she saw an ad looking for a volunteer dance instructor, she didn't hesitate. She applied right away. Dorothy, the studio owner, took her on immediately. "There's fire in your eyes, girl," Dorothy said with a smile. "Exactly what we need." The first classes were humble, only 3 students. But Callie taught with such passion, showing them the basic tango steps, correcting their posture, cracking jokes to lighten the atmosphere. The studio was slowly filling up again. Week by week, more and more people walked through those doors. Shy teenagers, elderly women, even a firefighter trying to impress a girl. And Callie, she felt alive again. She wasn't dancing for money or to prove anything to anyone. She was dancing because she loved it. And that, in itself, changed everything. She had no idea that Henry was watching her. He found out where she was through a former employee who still respected him. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Henry would stand across the street from the studio, watching her through the window. He saw her laugh, teach, shine, and every time his heart would tighten. It was as though she was thriving, maybe even better without him. But he couldn't stop coming. He couldn't stay away. Then one day, Dorothy organized a small performance for the local community. Nothing extravagant, just the students showing off what they'd learned. Callie took charge of organizing everything. It was the day of the event. The small community center was packed. Plastic chairs lined the room, children ran around. The smell of popcorn filled the air. Callie was backstage, helping the students prepare, when she heard whispers from the crowd. "It's him. The one from the scandal, Henry Scott, is here." A storm twisted in Callie's stomach. Her heart began to race. She cautiously peeked through the curtains, and there he was, sitting in the back row, trying his best to remain unnoticed. But a few people had already recognized him. The room buzzed with whispers, some murmuring angrily, "Get out of here, liar. We don't want people like you here." Henry lowered his head in shame, rising to leave. But just as he stood, Callie stepped out onto the stage. The room fell silent as her voice rang out, confident, steady. "Attention, please." Everyone turned to look at her. She took a deep breath before continuing. "I know many of you recognize the man at the back of the room, and I understand your thoughts. But before you judge him, let me say a few words." She looked directly at Henry, whose gaze was frozen, his eyes wide. "No one learns to dance without mistakes. We all trip. We all fall. And every one of us deserves a second chance." The room was still. Henry's eyes never left her, glistening with emotion. "I don't know if everything they say about him is true," she continued. "But I know one thing. He came here, and that counts for something. So if you'll allow me, I want him to stay. Because tonight is about new beginnings, and we all deserve a chance at that." A moment of silence passed. People exchanged glances, their expressions mixed. Some still hesitant, but little by little they started nodding. The first to clap was Dorothy from the front row. Then others joined in. Henry, his emotions barely contained, gave a small nod to Callie and returned to his seat. The performance went on flawlessly. The students danced with pride, the audience applauding with every move. At the end, Callie took a bow, and the room erupted in a standing ovation. After it was over, Henry stood outside the center waiting. Half an hour later, Callie walked out, a box of jewelry in hand. "Hi," he said nervously. "Hi," she answered, not stopping. Henry followed her down the street. "Callie, thank you for what you did in there. I didn't do it for you. I did the right thing." "I know, but still, thank you." They walked in silence for a few steps before Henry stopped. "Callie, you need to know something. There was no bet. That was all Richard's idea. I never would have done that to you." Callie stopped as well, but she didn't turn around. "Why should I believe you?" "You don't have to, but I swear on my grandmother's memory, I'm the only one who ever believed in you, and I never used you. What I feel for you, it's real." Finally, she turned around. Her eyes were filled with tears. "And what exactly do you feel for me, Henry?" He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I love you. I know I have no right to say this after everything, but it's the truth. I love you, Callie. Tears streamed down her face. I don't know if I can trust you. Then let me prove it to you. Let me make things right. Callie wiped her face with the back of her hand. How? Henry paused for a moment. The studio. Dorothy said you need repairs. Let me help. Henry, I don't need your charity. It's not charity. It's a way to show you I care about you and what you're doing. Please. Callie hesitated. Every part of her wanted to say, go away, but there was another part, stubborn and hopeful, that wanted to give him a chance. All right, she finally agreed, but with one condition. What condition? This isn't forgiveness. This is a new beginning, and you'll have to work very hard to earn my trust back. Henry smiled in relief. I'll work every day if I have to. It'll take exactly that, she said, barely managing a smile. Days passed and Henry showed up at the studio every day. He painted walls, fixed mirrors, even helped lay new flooring with the carpenter. Callie watched him, torn between irritation and something she didn't want to admit, hope. Gradually, they started talking again. At first, it was about small things, the repairs, the students, the weather. But the conversations deepened, and the chemistry between them returned. Slowly, carefully, but it was there. 2 weeks later, Dorothy called Callie into her office. In her hands was a delicate envelope. This came for you today, she said, handing over the letter. Callie opened it and read. It was a job offer from a dance company in Buenos Aires, the same one her mother had once danced with. The salary was excellent, the opportunity unique. But it meant leaving New York, leaving the studio, leaving Henry. Callie folded the letter, her heart tightening. When do I have to answer? She asked. By the end of the week, Dorothy replied. But Callie, this is the chance of a lifetime. Can't pass it up, Henry said. Callie nodded but didn't speak. That night she couldn't sleep staring at the letter. Buenos Aires, the dream of her mother, the dream she had once shared. But now something new had settled in her heart. Henry. And for the first time in a long time, Callie didn't know what to do next. For 3 days she stared at the letter, as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Buenos Aires, the city where her mother had shone, where she had always dreamed of dancing. But now Henry was here, the studio, and a life that was finally starting to make sense. On the 4th day, she found the courage to show him the letter. Henry was finishing painting the last wall of the studio when she entered. Paint was in his hair, on his shirt, even on his face. Callie couldn't help but laugh. You look like an abstract painting. Thanks, he smiled, wiping his hands on a rag. I'm trying to start a new fashion trend. What do you have there? Callie took a deep breath and handed him the letter. Henry silently read it, his face darkened. Buenos Aires, he muttered, handing the letter back. That's amazing, Callie. Yeah, she quietly confirmed, waiting for him to say more. Henry forced a smile. You're going to accept the offer, right? Callie blinked, surprised. You think I should? Of course, this is the chance of a lifetime. To dance where your mother danced, to live her dream, your dream. How could you say no? She crossed her arms, her voice steady. So, you want me to leave? Henry paused. It seemed like he was about to tell the truth. Callie felt her heart breaking into pieces. Every word Henry spoke so honestly and painfully tore at her from the inside. She stood before him, preparing to leave for Buenos Aires, to follow her dream. And he didn't ask her to stay. He simply said he wanted her happiness. She had hoped for more, hoped that he would say he couldn't let her go, that he needed her. But no, he said, I want you to be happy. It was honest. It was his decision. But she couldn't suppress the feeling of disappointment. 2 days later, after making the final preparations and with the scent of goodbyes lingering in the studio, Callie made her decision. She called the dance company in Buenos Aires and accepted their offer. Her flight was scheduled for next week, and it was official. That evening, Dorothy threw a small farewell party at the studio. The students brought cakes, drinks, and even prepared a special dance number for Callie. There was laughter, tears, and promises to return. And amidst it all, Henry. He stood off to the side with that same sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was there, but said nothing unnecessary. When the last of the guests had left and the studio had emptied, the silence hung in the air. Henry and Callie were left alone. Moonlight softly lit the freshly painted floor, creating a sense of completion in the room. "So, it's over?" she asked quietly, trying to sound indifferent, though her heart ached inside. "I know," Henry replied, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He couldn't hide the hurt. The silence lingered, and in that moment, Callie realized she couldn't stay silent any longer. Then Henry took a step forward, his eyes full of pain. "Callie, I need to tell you something before you leave." "What?" she asked, her heart skipping a beat. Henry sighed as if each word was a struggle. "I lied when I said I wanted you to leave. I don't want you to go. I want you to stay, but I can't ask you that because it would be selfish. You deserve to follow your dream." Tears filled her eyes, but she still tried to keep her composure. "Henry, let me finish." His voice shook. "You changed my life. You showed me that not everything can be bought, that some things, people, are too precious for that. And I love you. I understand now what that means. I love you truly." Tears that she had tried to hold back now flowed freely down her cheeks. "I love you too, idiot." Her voice was full of despair and hope. Tangled together, Henry smiled, and in his eyes, the gleam of passion and pain shifted into something warm, almost happy. "Then we have a problem." "Yes," she agreed, smiling through her tears. "We definitely have a problem." He moved closer to her. "If you dance that tango in Buenos Aires, I'll be sitting in the front row." "Promise?" Callie laughed, but her laughter was through her tears. "You promise?" "I promise." And he kissed her. It was a slow, gentle kiss, full of all the pain and passion they hadn't yet expressed in words. When they pulled away, they were both breathless. "Stay with me tonight before you leave," Henry whispered. "I need you here." Callie nodded, unable to speak. She just couldn't hold herself together anymore. They spent the night together at his apartment. That night, they talked about everything and nothing at the same time. Laughter flowed freely as they recalled funny moments. But the most touching moments came between serious conversations. Henry shared about his lonely childhood and his constant need to prove his worth. Callie confessed her fears, the fear of not meeting expectations, of not being worthy of following in her mother's footsteps. But even amidst such serious topics, there were funny moments, like when Henry tried to make breakfast and burned every pancake. "Seriously, how can you burn pancakes?" Callie laughed, opening windows to let the smoke out. "It's a talent," Henry said, tossing the pan into the sink. A terrible talent. In the end, they ordered bagels and coffee, sitting on the living room floor, watching the dawn break outside the window. When it was time to head to the airport, Callie was already ready with her suitcase in hand. Henry insisted on seeing her off. The ride was quiet. Neither of them knew what to say. Everything felt too important yet fleeting. At the airport, Henry carried her suitcase to the check-in counter. "Well, that's it," Callie said, trying to smile, though her eyes were shadowed with sadness. "That's it," he repeated quietly. They hugged, and Callie pressed her face to his chest, trying to remember the moment and the smell, the warmth, every detail. "I'll miss you," she whispered. "I will too. But you'll do great. I believe in you." He smiled. She pulled away, wiping her eyes. "You promised to be there." "I promise. Front row," he said firmly. Callie smiled, unsure whether to believe him but desperately wanting to. Taking one last glance, she passed through security and disappeared into the crowd. A new life awaited her ahead. But in her heart, there was the memory of what they had shared, of what was and what could have been. Henry stood there, watching until he could no longer see her. Then, alone in the crowded airport, he whispered, "I'll be there, Callie. I promise." The flight to Buenos Aires was long and lonely. Callie tried to sleep but couldn't. She stared out the window, thinking about everything she had left behind. When the plane landed, her heart fluttered with both fear and anticipation. Buenos Aires was exactly as she imagined, vibrant, chaotic, alive. The dance troupe had prepared a small but cozy apartment for her. On the first day of rehearsals, Callie met the other dancers, talented, dedicated, and warmly welcoming. But the nights were difficult. Callie wandered around the city, visiting places her mother had once frequented. Old theaters, historic cafes, squares where tango was still played live. In each of these places, she felt her mother nearby, smiling, proud. The rehearsals were intense. The choreography was complex, emotional, and demanded everything from Callie. But she was determined. Each step was a tribute, each movement a promise. Weeks passed quickly. Then the night of the performance arrived. The Teatro Colón, one of the most prestigious venues in South America, was packed to capacity. Over 2,000 spectators. Backstage, Callie's heart raced, her palms sweaty. "Are you ready?" asked Eduardo, the troupe's director, an elegant man. "I think so," she replied, trying to steady her breath. "You'll be magnificent. Your mother would be so proud of you." Tears welled up, but Callie held them back. "Thank you." The music started, the lights dimmed, and Callie stepped onto the stage. Her heart beat like a drum. She took her position, took a deep breath, and waited. The curtain rose. The audience erupted in applause. Callie glanced at the crowd and saw him. In the front row, dead center, Henry. He had kept his promise. Dressed in a flawless suit, his eyes shining, a smile on his face. Callie's heart swelled. She wanted to laugh, cry, run to him. But the music had already begun. And she did what she did best. She danced. It wasn't just a dance. It was a declaration. Every gesture was for him. Every turn a promise. Every step a piece of her heart given fearlessly. The audience disappeared. Only she and the music remained. The theater faded away. All that was left was her, the music, and Henry, with a look that said everything without words. When the dance ended, there was a moment of stillness. Then an explosion of applause, shouts of admiration, people jumping to their feet. Callie bowed, and finally, tears began to flow down her cheeks. She searched for Henry in the front row, but he was gone. His seat was empty. Callie's smile faded. She looked around in confusion, but she couldn't find him anywhere. Henry had vanished. She rushed out from backstage and sprinted through the theater corridors, opening doors, peering into every corner, but he was nowhere to be found. "Did you see the tall man in a suit who was sitting in the front row?" she asked a security guard. "Yes, miss. He left right after your dance. He seemed to be in a hurry." Callie's heart tightened. Why had he left without saying a word? She returned to her dressing room, trying to process everything that had happened. Eduardo congratulated her. The other dancers hugged her, but Callie could barely focus. All that echoed in her head was one name, Henry. At home, Callie tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. She sent messages, no reply. For several days, she tried to focus on rehearsals and the remaining shows, but it was impossible. Henry was gone, and she couldn't understand why. Then rumors started circulating. "I heard he went back to New York," one of the dancers said during a break. Callie turned surprised. "How do you know?" "I saw it in the news. Henry Scott is involved in a big project. Looks like he's donating money," she replied. "I don't remember the details." Callie pulled out her phone and quickly searched the news. The headlines spoke of Henry Scott donating millions to charity, but the details were vague. She felt worse than ever. He had left without a word, as if she never existed. 2 weeks later, Callie made a decision. She called Eduardo and asked to end the season early. "But we still have 3 shows left," he said, concerned. "I know, I'm sorry, but I need to go home." Eduardo sighed, but he understood. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." 3 days later, Callie was on a plane back to New York. As Buenos Aires disappeared beneath the clouds, she stared out the window, feeling that strange mix of relief and heartbreak. When she landed, she went straight to the Bronx in a taxi. But as the car passed through the city center, something caught her eye. A massive billboard over a newly renovated building. Bethany Brooks Dance Academy, in honor of a legend. Callie froze. Her heart pounded as she stepped out of the car and approached the glass doors. Inside, everything was pristine. Gleaming wooden floors, spotless mirrors, soft golden lights. And on the main wall, a giant photograph of her mother, young, glowing, dancing the tango. Callie covered her mouth, trying to hold back tears. "Can I help you?" asked the friendly receptionist. "Who founded this school?" Callie managed to ask. "Mr. Henry Scott," the woman replied warmly. "He donated most of his fortune to open community dance schools across the city. This one is the main branch." Something inside Callie twisted. Henry had done this for her mother, but then she looked around and frowned. There was no mention of her, no plaque, no name, nothing. "Is there any information about the foundation itself?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes, there's a memorial wall in the back room if you'd like to see it." Callie followed the woman into a smaller space. There, mounted on the wall, was a bronze plaque listing all the founders and sponsors. Henry Scott's name was right at the top. Hers wasn't there at all. She walked out of the building feeling hollow. Henry had done something extraordinary, but he'd erased her from it. Or worse, he had chosen to. Back in her tiny Bronx apartment, she dropped her suitcase to the floor and collapsed onto the couch. Anger, sadness, confusion. She didn't know which emotion hurt more. Then, a knock on the door. She opened it to find a courier holding a sleek, elegant envelope. Delivery for Miss Brooks. She signed, took it, and froze the moment she saw the handwriting. Henry's. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. "Callie, I know it's hard to understand right now and you probably hate me, but please trust me one last time. Meet me where it all began, tonight. 8 p.m. Henry, she read it once, twice, 3 times, where it all began. The Metropolitan Palace. She looked at the clock. 6 p.m. 2 hours to decide. Half of her wanted to tear the letter apart, throw it away, and forget everything. But the other half, the stubborn, hopeful part, wanted to go. With a deep breath, she pulled out her only elegant dress and began to get ready. At 7:45, Callie stood at the grand entrance of the Metropolitan Palace. The building glowed just like it had that unforgettable night months ago, but now it was empty. Silent. She pushed open the heavy doors and stepped inside. The ballroom was exactly as she remembered it. The shimmering chandelier, the polished floor, the faint hum of the orchestra in the corner. And there he was, Henry Scott. Standing in the center of the room, perfectly composed in a tailored suit, a single red rose in his hand. When he saw her, his face softened into that familiar smile, the one that always made her heart skip a beat. "You came," he said quietly. Relief in his voice. Callie folded her arms, trying to stay firm. "You have exactly 5 minutes to explain why you disappeared in Buenos Aires. And why my name isn't on that school." Henry took a cautious step forward. "Can I have 10? There's a lot I need to say." 5, she insisted. He chuckled softly. "All right, 5. Then he took a deep breath, like a man standing on the edge of a cliff about to jump. "I left Buenos Aires because I had to come back here and finish everything. The school, the paperwork, the repairs. I wanted everything to be ready before you came back." "And why didn't you tell me?" Callie asked. "Because I wanted to surprise you, and because I was afraid you'd say it was charity again." Callie felt the anger start to ease, just a little. "And my name? Why isn't it anywhere?" Henry smiled faintly. "Because your name belongs somewhere much bigger." He extended his hand. Callie hesitated, but eventually she took it. Henry led her to the center of the hall, where images began to appear on the floor, documents, blueprints, and then a photo of her with her mother. "The Bethany Brooks School, it's just the beginning," Henry explained. "I've donated a large portion of my fortune to create a foundation that will support talented dancers who can't afford to pay. Scholarships, lessons, equipment, everything." The images changed, and then the name of the foundation appeared on the floor. "The Kelly Brooks Arts Foundation." Callie gasped, her eyes widening. "Your name isn't on the school because it will be on something much bigger," Henry continued, his voice full of emotion. "Something that will help hundreds of people. Just like you helped me." Tears streamed down her cheeks. She couldn't say a word. Henry stepped forward and gently took her hands. Callie, that night here I challenged you out of pride. Today I want to ask you out of love. He sank to one knee, and in that moment the world seemed to stop. Marry me, Henry said, his voice firm yet filled with feeling. Not for a bet, not to impress you, but because I love you. And I can't imagine my life without you. Callie clutched her mouth with her hand, tears spilling out. Henry, I know I have no right to say this after everything, he interrupted. I know I've hurt you, but for the last few months I've tried to become the man you deserve. And I'll spend my life proving that if you let me. Callie looked at him, this man who had once been so arrogant in this very room, and saw someone completely different. Humble, sincere in love. You're an idiot, she finally said. Henry blinked, surprised. Is that a yes? No, she replied, smiling through her tears. It's a maybe if you dance the tango with me right now. Henry laughed. Seriously? One more time? One more time. But this time, no bets, just the two of us. He stood up and gave her a grand bow. It's an honor. Miss Brooks. The orchestra, Callie hadn't even noticed them, began to play. The dance. As they began to move, the world around them seemed to fade away. There were no spectators, no judgments, just them, spinning across the floor. Henry was still a little awkward in some steps, but there was something different this time. Something more, something real. Love. True, deep, inevitable love. When the music ended, they stood facing each other. Henry, nervously swallowing, asked the question that had been hanging in the air. So, what's your answer? Callie smiled, her eyes sparkling. The answer is, almost. But first you have to prove one thing. Henry furrowed his brow. What? Callie took a step back, her eyes full of mischief and challenge. You have to dance a full tango without mistakes, in front of everyone with an open heart. Henry laughed. Are you joking? No, I'm not joking. It's my final condition. He looked at her, and the determination in her eyes made him realize she wasn't kidding. All right, he agreed. Smiling, Callie quickly typed something on her phone, and within moments the doors to the hall opened. Dorothy entered, followed by all the students from the studio. Behind them came a few more people, friends, acquaintances, even a couple of investors who still supported Henry. Well, Callie said with a smile, are you ready to dance? Henry looked at the small crowd that had filled the hall and swallowed hard. Did you plan all this? Dorothy, help me out. Come on, Mr. Scott, show everyone what you've learned. The moment was set. Henry, the once arrogant businessman, now stood before his love, ready to prove to the world and to himself that he had changed. But more than that, he was ready to take the ultimate leap of faith in the dance of his life. The orchestra began to play again. Henry took a deep breath, extended his hand, and started dancing. This time he was dancing with his heart. The room fell silent watching him. Everyone remembered that first moment months ago when he had been awkward and arrogant. But now everything was different. He led Callie with care, his eyes locked on hers. The first step was hesitant but confident. The second, more decisive, and by the third, something magical happened. Henry smiled. Not the smug smile he used to wear, but a genuine one, full of joy. Callie felt her heart melt. She followed him, allowing him to lead her as never before. He was truly leading her now, and when the moment came for the turn, Henry spun her with a grace she never knew he had. The room started to murmur, clearly impressed. Dorothy sat in the front row, wearing a broad smile. But then, right in the middle of the dance, Henry stepped on his own foot and nearly stumbled. Callie caught him, laughing out loud. You were dancing so well, she teased him. I know, I ruined everything, he replied, laughing too. But instead of stopping, they kept going. The mistake became part of the dance. Henry improvised a silly move, taking an exaggerated bow as if apologizing. Callie played along, pretending to be offended, before bringing him back into rhythm. The room erupted in laughter and applause. It wasn't a perfect dance. It was better. It was real. When the music ended, Henry made the final turn with Callie and caught her in his arms. Both, breathless, looked at each other as if they were the only people in the world. The entire room stood up, clapping and cheering. Echoes of approval rang throughout the hall. Henry looked around, seeing all those people supporting him. People who had every reason to doubt him, but instead had chosen to believe. Then he dropped to one knee. The room went completely silent. Callie covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide in shock. "Henry, what are you doing?" "What I should have done a long time ago," he said, his voice firm yet filled with emotion. "The first time I asked you to dance here, it was out of pride. I wanted to make a fool of you, to make you feel small. But you taught me the most important lesson of my life." Tears began to fall down her face. "You showed me that money doesn't buy respect, that power means nothing without compassion, and that true love is priceless." He took her hand, holding it gently. "Now, I don't want to humiliate you. I want to respect you every day for the rest of my life. Callie Brooks, will you marry me?" The room was absolutely silent. Everyone was waiting for her answer. Callie looked at him, at the man who had changed beyond recognition, the one who had almost lost everything, the one who had once flown to Buenos Aires just to see her dance. But she also saw the man who still had much to prove. "Henry," she said, her voice trembling, "I need to know that you've really changed. Not just for me, but for yourself." Henry nodded and stood up. "I understand. And I've already started." He gestured to someone in the crowd. A man in a suit stepped forward, holding a folder. Henry took the documents and handed them to Callie. "What is this?" she asked, confused. "These are papers for 5 public schools of dance and music that I helped open in the last 2 months. Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, Harlem, and Staten Island. All of them in honor of your mother and with full scholarships for gifted children." Callie flipped through the papers, her hands trembling. These were real contracts with official signatures. The room exploded in applause. Dorothy was crying. The students from the studio were celebrating with joy. "You really did all this?" Callie whispered, barely believing it. "I did," he replied, "because you taught me true wealth isn't in how much you have, but in how much you give." Callie dropped the papers and rushed to him, crying. He embraced her tightly, burying his face in her hair. "So is that a yes?" he asked, hope in his voice. Callie pulled back, wiping her face. "Almost yes," she said. "Almost?" Henry was surprised. "Almost. I have one condition." He sighed but smiled. "Of course, what is it?" She looked around at all the people who had come to support them. Then she looked directly at Henry. "You have to promise that you will never underestimate me again. That you will treat me as an equal partner. That you will listen when I speak. And that you will never investigate my life without my permission." Henry looked at her seriously. "Seriously?" "I promise, all of it. I swear. And one more thing." "What?" Kelly smiled playfully. "You have to learn how to cook. Because if we get married, I'm not spending my life eating food from Burke." The room exploded with laughter. Henry laughed and shook his head. "All right, I promise I'll learn to cook, or at least try not to burn the kitchen down." "Good," Kelly said. "Then yes, now it's definitely yes. I'll marry you, Henry Scott." The room erupted in applause, cheers, and whistles. Dorothy ran onto the stage and hugged them both. The students joined in, forming a big circle of hugs and joy. Henry took Kelly's face in his hands and kissed her, a long, gentle kiss full of promises. When they pulled away, they couldn't stop smiling. "I love you," Henry said. "I love you too," Kelly replied, laughing. "Even if you're terrible in the kitchen." The party that followed was spontaneous and chaotic. The orchestra played, people danced, and someone brought champagne. No one knew where it came from. Dorothy pulled Henry aside. "You're lucky, young man. This girl is pure gold." "I know," he agreed, watching Kelly laugh with the students. "I'm very lucky. Don't mess this up," Dorothy warned, pointing at him. "Because if you hurt her again, you'll answer to me." Henry laughed. "Yes, ma'am. I promise I won't let you down." Across the room, Kelly was talking to one of the younger students, a shy girl named Emma. "Are you going to keep teaching?" Emma asked hopefully. "Of course," Kelly replied confidently. "No matter what happens, I'll always be here. Even if I marry a billionaire," Kelly laughed. "Even if I marry a billionaire. Because dance isn't about money, it's about passion. And I'll never give that up." The evening continued with dancing, laughter, and stories. Henry even tried to give a speech, but froze in the middle and asked Kelly to finish it for him. "I just want to thank all of you," Kelly said, squeezing Henry's hand. for believing in us, for giving us a second chance and reminding us that no matter how many times we fall, we can always rise and dance again. The room exploded in applause and hearts fluttered with excitement. When the party finally began to quiet down, the clock had long struck midnight. Henry and Kelly stayed alone in the empty hall, leaning against the cold wall, sitting on the floor. "So this is it," Kelly said quietly. "Now we're really getting married." "Looks like it," Henry smiled. "Are you nervous?" "A little. Are you scared?" Kelly laughed, but there was sincerity in her laughter. "At least you're honest." They fell silent for a moment, enjoying the quiet and the closeness of each other. "Kelly," Henry suddenly said, "there's something I haven't told you." She immediately became alert and turned to him. "What is it?" "Your father, Richard Palmer. He contacted me last week." Kelly tensed. "What did he want?" "You need to apologize for the scandal, for the lie about the bet. He says he was trying to protect you but went about it the wrong way." "And did you believe him?" Henry shrugged. "I'm not sure, but he asked if he could be at the wedding. He wants a chance to make things right." Kelly closed her eyes, thinking deeply. "And what did you say?" "In that it's your decision, not mine." She remained silent for a long time before sighing. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive him. But maybe someday. Maybe at the wedding he can be there." "From a distance." Henry nodded, his gaze softening with understanding. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." Callie leaned her head on his shoulder, the weight of it all settling between them. "Thank you for telling me." "Always," Henry promised. They sat in silence for what felt like hours, dreaming of the future, of a life they were planning to build together, one with no secrets, no distance between them. When they finally stood to leave, Callie glanced back at the empty ballroom one last time. "This is where it all began," she whispered. "And here, everything begins again," Henry added. Taking her hand, they stepped out of the Metropolitan Palace hand in hand, ready for the new chapter of their lives. But just as they were about to exit the building, Callie stopped. "Henry, you know now you're the one who has to plan the entire wedding, right? Decorations, food, guests." Henry paled, panic flashing across his face. "I haven't thought about that." Callie laughed, shaking her head. "Relax, I'll help. But you have to promise me no one will investigate the catering." "I promise." Henry laughed too, his tension finally easing. The following months rushed by in a whirlwind of chaotic organization. Callie soon realized that planning a wedding was far more complicated than putting together a full-scale show. Flowers, invitations, menus, music. So many little details she never even thought about. Henry tried to help, but his ideas only made it harder. "What if we hire 5 different orchestras?" he suggested one day as they picked out music. Callie stared at him, blinking in disbelief. "Henry, this is a wedding, not a music festival. But it would be impressive." "Absurd. One orchestra, just one," she surrendered. "All right, you're the boss." Dorothy became their unofficial wedding planner. She showed up almost every day at Callie's apartment with new ideas, cake samples, and a whole list of stern opinions. "This dress is lovely, but you need something with more sparkle," she insisted, holding up a new picture. "Dorothy, I don't want to look like a disco ball," Callie protested. "Don't worry," Dorothy said confidently. "You'll look like a princess." Eventually, Callie picked a simple, elegant gown with delicate lace and a soft train. When Henry saw her at the rehearsal, he was speechless. You look ridiculous?" Callie asked nervously. "Perfect. You look perfect," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. Finally, the big day arrived. It was a crisp autumn morning, the sun shining brightly and the trees in Central Park turning shades of gold and red. The ceremony was scheduled to take place outdoors, in a private garden Henry had rented. Rows of white chairs, flowers everywhere, and a beautifully decorated arch awaited them. But, as expected, nothing went according to plan. The florist brought red roses instead of peach ones. The photographer was an hour late, and the cake that was supposed to have 3 tiers, well, it only had 2, the top one having fallen off during delivery. "This is a disaster," Callie muttered. Looking at the crumpled cake, Dorothy just shrugged. "Sweetheart, there's no such thing as a perfect wedding. What matters is how it ends." Callie sighed, nodded, and smiled despite the chaos. You're right. Let's keep going. Guests began to arrive. Friends, students from the studio, Henry's colleagues, even some investors who had come to show their support. The garden filled with laughter and chatter, the atmosphere light and joyful. As Callie waited backstage, ready to walk down the aisle, she noticed an unexpected guest, Richard Palmer. He was standing at the back of the rows of seats wearing a simple suit, his face tense. Their eyes met, and he gave her a small wave. Callie hesitated. Part of her wanted to send him away, but another part, the one learning to forgive, simply nodded in acknowledgement. Then the music began. Callie gripped her bouquet tightly and started walking down the aisle. Everyone stood up, turning to face her, but her gaze was locked only on Henry. He stood at the altar, impeccably dressed, his eyes filled with emotion. When she reached him, he whispered, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "You're not so bad yourself," Callie smiled back at him. The officiant began the ceremony, speaking about love, devotion, and the two people who had found each other under the most unexpected circumstances. Then came the vows. Henry took Callie's hands in his, took a deep breath, and began. "Callie, when I met you, I was a cocky fool who thought I could buy anything. You proved me wrong. You taught me humility, generosity, and the true meaning of love. I promise to respect you every day, to make you laugh even when you're mad at me, and never to burn the food again." The room burst into laughter. Callie cried and laughed at the same time. "And I promise to always dance with you, no matter how many times I step on your toes." Callie wiped her tears and began her vow. "Henry, from the first day, you annoyed me. But you showed me that people can change, grow, and become better. You believed in me when no one else did. You gave me hope when it seemed like everything was lost. And you loved me even when I was difficult. I promise to stand by you, tease you when you're being stubborn, and never leave you to cook alone." The guests laughed, and Henry smiled so widely that it looked like his face might burst from joy. The officiant concluded, "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Henry didn't wait for a second invitation. He pulled Callie to him and kissed her, and the entire garden erupted into applause and cheers. The reception was exactly as Callie had dreamed, simple, warm, with close friends and family, laughter and love. The food was delicious, the music was perfect, and the two-tiered cake was more than enough. During the celebration, Richard Palmer, Callie's father, approached her nervously. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice shaky. Callie looked over at Henry, who gave her an encouraging nod. She led her father to a quiet corner of the garden. "Thank you for letting me come," Richard said, his voice trembling. "I didn't deserve it." "No, you didn't," Callie replied honestly. "But I'm learning that forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about moving forward." Richard wiped his eyes. "I've made so many mistakes with you and your mom, and I know I can't fix everything. But if you give me a chance, I want to try to be a real father, even if it's too late." Callie was silent for a moment, then sighed. "One chance, just one. Don't waste it." Richard nodded, emotion flooding him. "I promise." They returned to the party, and something inside Callie shifted. Forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it opened the space for the future. When it was time for their first dance, Henry took Callie by the hand and led her to the center of the room. The orchestra played a slow, romantic tango. "Ready to impress me?" she teased. "Ready to try not to fall?" Henry grinned back. They began to dance. This time it wasn't a battle. It was a dance filled with warmth and mutual affection. They were simply two people who loved each other, moving in perfect harmony. Henry still missed a few steps, and Callie teased him about it. But each mistake was followed by a smile, a laugh, and a moment of pure joy. When the music came to a close, the crowd rose to their feet, giving them a standing ovation. Henry spun Callie one last time, pulling her close and whispering in her ear, "Thank you for teaching me to dance." "Thank you for learning," she whispered back. The party continued deep into the night, and as it began to quiet down, Henry and Callie sat at an empty table, watching the last of the guests leave. The garden was peaceful now, the air filled with the soft rustling of leaves and the warmth of their shared silence. In that quiet moment, they knew that their journey had only just begun. together, as partners, as a family. So, Mrs. Scott, Henry said, taking her hand, what are your plans for the future? Callie smiled. I think I'll expand the dance school, maybe open a few more branches in other states. I like that idea, Henry supported her. What else? I want to keep teaching. No matter how much we grow, I'll never stop teaching, Henry nodded. I'll always support you in everything. What else? Callie looked at him, her eyes shining. And I want us to keep dancing. No matter what happens, I want us to set aside time for our dance every week. Deal, Henry said, standing up and extending his hand. Shall we start right now? Callie took his hand, and they returned to the empty dance floor. No music, no audience. Just the two of them in the soft garden light dancing a slow, improvised tango full of love and promises. Let's never use tango as a challenge again, Callie whispered. Never, Henry agreed. Only as a language of love. They continued to slowly spin beneath the stars, while the rest of the world around them gradually disappeared. In that moment, Callie realized she had found her place. Not on a stage, not in a specific city, but here, in Henry's arms, dancing a tango that would never end. A tango of true love. What do you think about Callie and Henry's story? Share your thoughts in the comments. Rate the story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to not miss our new stories. And don't forget to check out more touching tales right here, at the end.